My name is Catherine Carlton. I'm Executive Director of Orchestras Canada, and I'm delighted to welcome the over 220 people who have registered for today's event. Everyone taking part in today's event can attest that we've collectively experienced some almost unthinkable changes to our work, leisure, and home lives in the past 11 weeks. You'll notice that I've deliberately not used the word unprecedented. It's been tough, and the challenges will be with us for a while. Even as we respond to the day-to-day issues, though, we need to be asking ourselves, how might orchestras and the people who love them use this time well? That's a framing question for everything that we're doing at Orchestras Canada these days. It has very much influenced the development of the relaunch series, our rebrand of this year's national conference. Every one of the next 4 events we've scheduled engages one or more terrific thinkers in sharing approaches and information that we believe will help orchestras today and in the months and years to come. I'm thrilled that we're launching this series with Linda Nazareth. I know that she'll bring a provocative and informed overview of a changing world. Linda is an economist, author, columnist, broadcaster, and speaker. She's the Senior Fellow for Economics and Population Change at policy think tank, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and she's an expert in demographic and economic trends. Her new book is Work is Not a Place, Our Lives and Our Organizations in the Post-Jobs World. A look at the future of work. It is a readable and engaging look at the way that demographics, technology, and shifts in the global economy will reshape our realities. Throughout her career, Linda has used her fairly unusual combination of skills as an economist and a communicator, 2 words you don't often see side by side, to work and consult in a wide variety of industries. She's currently consulting to organizations in the public and private sector, but you may also recognize Linda from the decade she spent as the on-air economist for Business News Network, Canada's cable news channel. People of Orchestras Canada, people of Canadian orchestras, please welcome Linda Nazareth.
Catherine, thank you so much for that introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I value what you do, and I'm really happy to be part of this discussion about how you can get back to doing what you do, but perhaps do it in a different way, because we are going to be in a very different world. Now, just let me start with saying 3 months ago was the last time I heard live music. I'm a speaker, as Catherine said, and I was in Orlando for a really big conference. In fact, the keynote for the whole thing was President Obama, so he drew this gigantic crowd. I had a somewhat smaller session for mine, but it was still great energy. No one worried about what they were touching or whose hand they were shaking or anything else. I had a little bit of time before my plane that night on the Saturday, and decided, because I was speaking here and because I like music, I would hear the Orlando Philharmonic. It was great. It was the afternoon performance. I observed things about the audience, somewhat older obviously, observed things about the whole performance. It seemed to me it was an incredibly expensive thing to put on, but I thought, well, great, this economic model is one that's working for now. Maybe I'll think about ways it won't work as things change. I didn't realize they would change so quickly and so completely. That was the last conference I will be doing in person for a while. That was the last bit of live music I'd be hearing for a while. Last time I'd go through an airport and not really think twice about anything at all. And as Catherine says, our lives have changed. We have to cope with that. But I believe we'll come back out of it in a different place, a better place. And for you who are already in a point in time where you had to rethink some of the things you've done for a long time, I don't want to say it's a good thing. It isn't a good thing in so many ways, but it will give you opportunities. Now, I think we have to think of this in 3 separate stages. The stopping the bleeding part of it, which I'll talk about first, the transition phase where you're perhaps allowed to reopen or society is allowed to reopen, but nothing will really be fixed in terms of a vaccine. And finally, the post-vaccine world, which we will get to. It may take a year or 2 years, but we will get there. And that's where we'll be living for the longest part of that. So 3 different ways, 3 sets of things we want to think about, and 3 chances perhaps to reshape what we do in all industries, and certainly for you in your industry. Let's talk about, first of all, the stopping the bleeding part of it. We know that we went from operating completely as an economy to operating at, I don't know, 50, 60%, in some sectors not operating at all, as in yours, and travel not operating at all. And we're just trying to cope with that and go day to day. I think that there's many things to worry about in terms of economics. tax. And it would be sugarcoating it to say, I'm not really worried about lots of parts of this. You know, people have credit card bills. In a few months, they may stop paying them. We already have an unemployment rate that is 5 times what it was a few months ago. It may top out in Canada at 20 or 25%. That's crazy. That is scary. It still means there's 75% of the workforce working, though. And I think you have to really concentrate on that part of it. The good news about this is so far, the economic losses overall have really been concentrated in younger people and people in the service sector. Not that that's okay in any way, but it means in terms of overall activity, it's not as dangerous. If we were to move to the next phase where people who were working full-time, making higher salaries lost their jobs, I would be much more frightened. And I think we're not there. We have perhaps a chance to not get there. And I give this government a certain amount of credit, not complete credit, but I believe that the benefits they've put in so far are stopping some of the bleeding. And for those of you who are worried that they will not be able to pay them longer term, actually on an international basis, Canada is not spending that much of GDP, less than Germany, even in some cases less than the US. I think there would be precedent to spend more and still have a situation in which we can live with and pay back the taxes on for some time. So I wouldn't worry too much about how much it's costing and whether the benefits will go somewhat longer. And so I think in that sense, we're in a pretty good place. But absolutely, it's scary. And, you know, in terms of music and musicians in orchestras and in other sectors, I give them huge credit. I think this is a sector that has stepped up and said, hey, we're here and we are of value. And in terms of public relations, nothing better could have been done than all the concerts that we see on Twitter or Zoom, or the fact that the National Arts Centre is emailing out performances, or Lincoln Center is opening up and showing kids things online that they can do. I think as a sector, this has been an A-plus performance. As an economist, I say, well, that's great, but somebody should pay for this. And if I have a concern, it's that too much of this is being given away. I realize it's very, very hard to monetize this, but I think from this point on, every single thing should be about how do we monetize this? Is there a way to get somebody to pay for this? You know, in terms of public relations, Canada Day is coming up. Victoria Day is gone, but every mayor in every town in Canada is going to want to do something to say, look, we're here, we like you guys, we want you to vote for us again. Music can be part of that. It always has been at these performances. Maybe there should be something done over Zoom, or maybe there should be a single musician in every park in Toronto playing. Or maybe there's a way to do this, but it shouldn't be done for free. I think every single thing from this point on should be about, let's bring in what money we can bring in. And that's a theme across industries. I talk to different ones and I look at different ones. The next year may not be about getting what we used to get, but it'll be about, let's get what we can and try and keep going and move to the next stage. But keep that in mind, that this stage is just about visibility, watching that the benefits and the like are what as much as they could be, and that government is still there, and trying to make as much back as you possibly can. And as we move forward, I hope it'll be easier in some ways. Perhaps it'll be a little bit harder as people get stretched, but let's not lose sight of that. Because you know what, we are moving to the transition. Depending where you are, the transition might have started. If you're in Ontario, it may take longer. If you're in Saskatchewan, it may move more quickly. But we're getting to the point where we're able to do more things and include more people and perhaps start playing to some kind of audiences for you, if not the biggest ones. And as I said, this is the make money where you can phase. Play what you can, see who's got a budget, and try and get a little bit of that. You know, I do some work for the housing sector, and one of the things that struck me, and what we've seen in other countries, is people had all this money earmarked for weddings, and now they can't have those weddings. So maybe they're putting that into a house, and you will see a little bit of a blip there. I don't know if you can access the wedding money for what you do, whether you can do private concerts for brides and grooms or invite them in and do tiny little weddings in these concert halls, whether the economics work at all. But I think you should think about where money had been earmarked to be spent this year and see if some of it can come back to your sector. Do it quickly before it all gets cut. But there is still some there, even for corporate parties. Some of it had been earmarked for Christmases this year, and obviously they're going to pull back. They're worried about things, but for the ones who still are relatively solvent, see if you can get some of their money and offer them some product they will buy, because it's possibly there. Now, as we get into next year, I'm still worried it'll be the 60% economy. I've heard people say it's the 80% economy, it's the 90% economy. I think there's reasons to think we, at some points, will be working as 60% of capacity. And you do have to plan for that. You have to plan for a year and 2 years and 3 years and 5 years, perhaps, where things are below capacity. I think when we come back out of this, we will come back into a recession, and that will not end the day that there is a vaccine. So keep that in mind. I mean, companies, I said, will have budgets right now. As we get into next Canada Day, I think they will pull back very, very sharply. Some might have already, but even for those who get through this phase, there is no guarantee that over the next year or 2 years, they will have what they used to have. So, that obviously has to be in your plans. That will be into their plans on giving and supporting arts next year. And it's obvious concern. I'm also concerned about the reverse wealth effect. Now, you might have heard about the wealth effect during the good times, that when the stock market goes up or the value of your house goes up, you feel rich and you say, okay, I can take that trip to Europe because you know what, I'm in a pretty good place. And then when you think that your stock portfolio has gone down, or the value of your house has gone down, you feel poor and say, you know what, I don't feel like spending the money. And this is a concern to me too, that arts tend to be supported when people feel rich. And if we get into a point where everybody feels poor, and I don't think we're really there yet, I think we're still kind of in a shock phase for a lot of people, then you see people pulling back next year. And I don't say these things to be really negative. I say them because they need to go into your business plans. That I don't see this as a 6-month or 12-month kind of thing. I think it's something that has to be put in for the longer term, that budgets will be tight and you will be operating with that reality. I'll share a story that 10 years ago, I gave a presentation to a large manufacturing company. It was before the real downturn happened. And I looked at all these things and I said, guys, I think you need to plan for not a great year next year. And the person who organized it complained about me to my speakers agency that I was using at the time and said, you know what, she was a real downer. We were trying to get everyone all excited about the prospects for next year, and she came in and said there could be a recession. There probably is going to be. And you know what, there was a recession, and I gave them my best information. In that sense, they didn't want to hear it. I think you do want to hear it, and I think you need to hear it. So from my vantage point, I'm not just worried about this year, next year. I'm worried about muted growth for a longer period of time. Now, you have advantages. I mean, you have this advantage that you play to these large concert halls. I don't know what the economics will be, short-term, long-term. I do not know what the price reductions will be for you to use these places over the short-term or long-term. But I do know that during the transition phase, you can have a small number of people and have social distancing work for you. And I would really urge you to make that happen, because at least there's something you can do. Your average restaurant or bar can't do this. They have a very small amount of space. Having 2 people in there may not work for them at all. In your case, I realize the economics may not work either, but you do have this advantage. So during the transition phase, perhaps that can be used to your advantage. And the other thing I would say for the transition phase, 1,000%, is absolutely, this is when you need to engage your core audience. I know there's been a lot of talk about developing the audience and bringing in millennials and bringing in whoever else. I would say that can wait for another day. That if you can only do one thing now, do not lose this part of the audience, older, richer, whoever they are. Because if you lose them, I'm really scared for what you have looking forward. Okay, this is the part you need to hold on to. Make them feel like superstars. If you can't bring them in person, maybe you can bring them in on stage, on Zoom. Maybe you can bring them in as photographs or dolls or something you put on a seat. And by the way, this is not a great picture. I realize it's what I could get. The audience is going to look like this in the transition. There's not going to be people packed in like that. And the stage may not look like that either. But the people on your screen and the people on your audience, the people who can't be there in person but who you can possibly sell to, need to be acknowledged in some way. And maybe if you can't sell them the experience of coming out, maybe you sell them the experience of having champagne delivered to their houses or a meal delivered as part of what you sell them. So they're excited and they're maybe dressed up and they're sending you a screenshot and they're part of whatever you can do in the short term. And that could be exciting. That could be an exciting party to have for Labor Day or Christmas or whatever else, where people are experiencing this event with you. Oh, I leave that with you to see if the economics could work or if this is something. But please, from everything I've seen, and I've been through many of your reports and reports from other countries, this core is absolutely vital to you. And then we're going to get to the post-vaccine future. I really want to mostly talk about that because let's not forget that that is where we're going to be long-term. I would like to think we're all vaccinated in 2021, but even if we're not, there'll be herd immunity at some point, or maybe it'll be 2022. Maybe it'll be before that. But if you were doing a strategic plan, you wouldn't worry that much about 1 year. You'd say, we're doing a plan for 2 years and 3 years and 5 years. And that is your post-vaccine future. It is where you come out on the other side. And what will that look like? Well, it won't look like before. This is a Lego version of Disney World, or Disneyland. And it would be nice if we could put all the pieces back together and say Disney's going to operate like it did before and orchestras are going to operate like they did before. But we can't do that. It's not that automatic. Disney, when they open up, will be a different place. And when you open up, you will be a different place too. I say this as somebody who was not an expert in the economics of orchestras, and probably still not, but I looked at a lot of numbers and I was kind of appalled at the economic model. I salute you that you could make money at this because it seems so incredibly expensive to do what you do. Your fixed costs were so high to tour. There's so many people and so many things you had to account for. I would like to think you can do that when we get back to whatever our post-pandemic reality is, but I would guess that would be even more difficult than it already was, so you have to rethink that part of it. Look for a way to get your fixed costs down starting now. I said it does come down to demographics. You have to think about who will be in your audience post-pandemic, and I totally expected to be talking to you about engaging millennials and engaging Generation Z and even engaging Generation X. And yet, when I looked at everything I looked at things from France and from the US, and I actually went to reports that were written 10 and 20 years ago, I am less worried about the aging of your audience than I thought I would be. It would be great if you got people in younger, obviously, but I think for the 5 years or 10 years that we're talking about to turn this around, you are actually pretty well positioned. And I'll tell you why. Here's the Canadian economy, the Canadian population, and I've graphed it 3 ways: 1999, 2019 last year, and then 20 years from there, 2039. And you can see the shape of this changes. That 1999, it was a fairly young world. As we move to 2019, 2020, it's a somewhat older world. You can see the bulge of population move up. Now, the youngest baby boomers are about 57 years old, so the bulk of them are in their 60s. And the reality is we get 20 years from now as the shape changes again. It doesn't get very young, though. And I'll show it to you a different way so you can understand it easier, or I can understand it easier. If you look at growth in population, between 2010 and 2020, the decade that we just finished, you can see that the strongest growth was people in their 60s. And I hope you benefited from that. I hope that they came in and listened to music and spent money and supported the arts in general. It really wasn't in their 50s. And there was a drop in people in their 40s. So if you were unhappy that you didn't have a whole lot of people in their 40s coming in, probably wasn't your fault. They really weren't there in large numbers. This is the absolute change in Canada. And if we go forward for the next 10 years, that's the orange bars, the biggest growth is going to be people in their 70s. There'll be growth in their 60s, not a whole lot in their 50s. And the decade after that, the silver, you can see that then you will have growth in people in their 50s and you won't have the oldest population. Now, what does this mean? Well, I guess the question I'm sure you've grappled with, and which I tried to grapple with, is do you have to have people interested in buying tickets when they're in their 30s and 40s to bring them in when they're 50 and 60 and 70? Or will they come in even if before that they hadn't spent money on this? I'm inclined to think that they will spend the money with you, or you can potentially bring them in even if they haven't spent it before now. Because they were spending on concert tickets. They were perhaps, we're talking people in their 40s, spending this year on hearing Elton John, or they're spending on hearing U2. And you know what? Those bands aren't touring forever. That group is slowly transitioning into buying more theater tickets. And I believe if you position it the right way, they will come in and listen to orchestra music as well. So I'm less concerned. We talk about this more in questions perhaps, but I actually think you're pretty well put together for the next however many years. I think the fact that you're going to have people in their 60s and 70s growing as a portion of the population, growing in absolute numbers so nicely, means you're well set up. They're more likely at that age to go bird watching and garden and go to the orchestra too. And I don't think it matters a lot if they hadn't done that before. So I leave you with some hope on the demographics at least. And yeah, you know, attracting other younger audiences is great, and I hope you can do it. And if you can afford to put campaigns together to do this, that is great. I wouldn't worry about millennials right now, because millennials are going to be pretty hard hit by this recession, and I'm not sure they'll be spending money in the largest amounts. If you can get the boomers interested, you're probably okay. Now, the boomers are going to be hit by this recession. As I said earlier, we are talking about portfolios going down, so people feeling somewhat poorer. And by the way, I hate these graphics. Every time I look these up, I look for generational ones, and they look very staged to me, as this one, which is younger people who are also getting hit. And look, I think the younger people will get hit worse. I think millennials will get hit worse. That they will perhaps see pay cuts. They've already seen pay cuts, actually, in many industries, but more. I think you will see job loss. And I think you will see more uncertain employment, at least for a time. I don't think it means everything is lost over the long run. However, if you're looking at where to target, I would say this is not necessarily the best part of the market. You know, that's not great. Like if you look at the Nutcracker group, I think of ballet, and every Christmas this is where people spend their money, then I would be concerned about this, at least in many centers, because that model of younger families may not spend. Having said that, they'll also not be traveling. And if any organization can get them to say, we'll spend money coming to see the Nutcracker or coming to hear an orchestra performance, they could do very well. I'm talking about both the transition period before the vaccine and also the longer term. Because what I see longer term is not necessarily a really poor society, but maybe more like how some of our parents and grandparents lived, where you don't just go to Disney easily, where it's a big deal to take a trip, and money is hoarded a little bit more and decisions are made much more carefully. So it could be that going to live music is an alternative to traveling. You know what? It is time to reimagine this model. It is time to think about everything. Who do you want to be when you come out of this? Do you want a works progress administration type model, as they had in the Depression in the US, where there were government programs? And it doesn't have to be exactly government incentives to work, but longer term. Do you want to be a sector that is more dependent on government? That's the way to go. Do you want to be one that's more unionized or less unionized? Do you want to be one where there's more contract players? Do you want to be one where more musicians aren't full-time musicians? Maybe the answer is no for all of those things, but it's time to sit down and say, what do we want? Because everything's changing, not just for the pandemic, but long before this pandemic started, I was out talking about the fourth industrial revolution. This is really a very pivotal time in history. We had the Industrial Revolution that was about steam and water and production. Then we had one in the late 1800s that was about the division of labor and electricity. Since the 1960s, we've had the one that's been about computers. This one's about cyber physical systems. It's changing everything. Yeah, the talking toaster is perhaps one of the cute parts of it, but it means everything is moving together. Biophysical systems, we don't know where it's going to come out. What we do know is it's already hit the economy. I'm going to give you a whole lot of economic slides, but I thought this one was interesting. Generally speaking, from the 1940s, since the end of the Second World War, when the economy does better, you can see that one line, gross domestic product, people's wages go up and people do better. And in the last 5, 6, 10 years, we've had this decoupling where people haven't done as well, even though the economy's done as well. And the argument is that this has a lot to do with this fourth industrial revolution we're losing. And again, I don't want to be too negative on this, but I think it's a consideration we need to think about, that we're at a point in history where everything's changing. You know, it's going to change jobs. Love this picture. These ladies are elevator operators. And at one point, they were the height of technology. They were a skilled job and they were excited about it. And now that doesn't exist anymore. A lot of jobs won't exist anymore. Here's a graph from the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, showing which types of jobs are most at risk because they can be mechanized. Food prep is at the top, construction, hospitality, teaching's at the bottom. I don't see musicians here. That's a good thing. I think that there's certainly always going to be a role here that a robot can't do, and that's a great thing. However, lots of parts of the industry and lots of parts of the economy will be changed. Polanyi's paradox, it should work for the arts. That's the idea that a robot can't do everything, that human beings do things, they can't always explain why they do them. The example I sometimes use is a wedding photographer. You might get a robot to set up a camera and take pictures of the bride and groom. The robot at this point can't tell when the bride's irritated at the groom and he needs to stop, or the family is getting irritated and you need to pull back. The robot doesn't have that empathy. And a lot of the skills you see in the arts are things robots can't do. So you have an edge that not every industry does, but it doesn't mean things won't change up too. Now, in general, this industrial revolution is giving us cool technology. I urge you to use it, the tools to look at audience segmentation, anything else you can get, it's there. Because when you do get around to looking for younger ticket holders, and when you do, actually anybody, everyone expects a personalized experience now. They want you to know about them, and they want you to tell them what they want, and they want you to sell them something unique. The tools are there for you to do that, and if you don't do it, somebody else likely will do it. And there's climate change. I know this was an issue even before we got to the point of the pandemic. Is everyone traveling too much? Orchestras traveling too much? Is it the right thing to bring somebody in for a performance? What about all the electricity you use? You know, should we rethink that? Well, you know what? This is part of this too. I think as we come out of the pandemic, decisions will be made that will be good for the economy and perhaps for climate change and the like. So this is the time to restructure all of it. What does that mean? It means work is changing everywhere. And I don't know why I'd come here and tell you that it would be different for your industry. Some things will be different. There's some ways you're protected. But if work is changing in every sector, I don't think orchestras are going to be protected from that. You know, we have something called the Hollywood model in work, where when you have a film made, people come in, make this film, and then they go away again. They form a team for a period of time, but you don't keep everyone employed forever. I think orchestras have tended to keep the team together for longer, and that's great in lots of ways, but I wouldn't be surprised if you saw the temporary teams a lot more in every sector. Now, it's time to think differently about all parts of this. One thing with musicians is they were the original gig workers, and I was kind of surprised as I looked at this how orchestras have tended not to have as many gig workers, that you've had a lot of people who are employed and on payroll. You know, maybe you change that up, maybe you don't change that up, maybe you want to think about it, but think about independent workers. There's 4 kinds of them. We only really hear about what's in the bottom right-hand corner, or the bottom half actually, the people who are reluctant. But, you know, there's some people who do it for primary income, and they're either the ones who are free agents and are happy. Those are the rock stars who, you know, they prefer to do this. They're not employed, obviously. They just are out there. These can be software geniuses who are getting paid by companies. They can be somebody who gets supplemental income but chooses it. That's somebody who perhaps has another job but sells things on Etsy or performs as a musician part-time. Then we have people who are forced into it, the ones who are reluctant to do this. These are the Uber drivers. That's the bottom left. And on the bottom right, financially strapped people who don't really want to be working an extra job but are doing it. Now, why do I show you this? Because I think we only hear about the reluctance, the Uber drivers and the like. There's a lot more people in the gig economy, and I think policy is going to be around that a lot more. And I think every sector will be remade around this a lot more. It used to make sense to have everybody work together. If you worked in a factory, everything was in one place. Maybe it still is. If you worked in an office, all the equipment was in one place. Well, it's not anymore. And in music, I'm not exactly sure how it'll play out for you. But again, every sector is changing. I think this one will change too. Where will musicians fit? You know, you'll be making the choices around that. You'll figure out what model you want and how you can make it work for you and for the people who are the musicians. I will say though, and I'm confident about saying this, is the world we have, this fourth industrial revolution world, this recession world, is one that's going to favor certain workers. That certain skills in communication and technology are going to be to the advantage of the workers who have them. What do I mean? I mean, the chef who can go on YouTube has an advantage over the guy who can just cook well. The accountant who can communicate has an advantage over the one who can't. And I think the musician who can do a podcast or who's good on YouTube or Twitter or whatever will have an advantage. And I think if you're communicating with an audience, that person probably has skills that should be rewarded, and I think increasingly will be rewarded. So maybe that's something you want to think as you build your teams. And I can imagine some of you already saying, you know, she has no idea. If we're hiring a musician, that's what we're hiring. We're not hiring a bunch of other skills. And you might be right. However, as I said, I see this world as changing, and I think it's time to think more broadly, because you are selling different things than you've always sold, and you are going to be regrouping in a different way. So that might change what you want from workers, and it might change what workers can offer you. You know, it's time to encourage broader skills. Maybe you want to train for broader skills. I know training has never been a thing that Canadian companies have done in a broad way. I doubt they have in your sector either, but this era may be one where that would be to everyone's advantage to do. And it's going to be a tough era for management. I'm sure it always has been, but tougher still, because in every industry, we are looking at a time where you have to sit down and say, do we keep these people? Do we retrain these people? Do we let them go? And in every industry I've looked at, the next 10 years will be more of that. And I don't think it'll be different for you. It'll be constant making decisions and constantly redefining what you have. Constant curation. You're also going to need a plan for different generations. I don't think it's super helpful that all over Twitter, millennials and boomers seem to be fighting. And millennials are saying, wow, we're the most oppressed generation. And boomers are saying, no, we are. But it seems to be what we have. And if you're going to be leading a team like this, you're going to be dealing with this on an ongoing basis. The best thing to do would be to find the strengths of each generation, bring them together. I don't know that we always do that. And every organization needs to do that. Definitely a challenge for orchestras. You already have these economic challenges. You already operate on thin margins. You already have to have a lot of technology and equipment and people all at once. And now you have to say it's all on the table. And again, for me, the business model was flawed. It didn't give you a lot of room. And now you are forced to rethink that. But you know, I want to, this last part of time speaking with you, talk about how resilience and coming through this is something that can happen and has happened many times before in recessions. And it's why I'm really optimistic about a lot of sectors, including yours. First of all, disruption is not something that started with the pandemic. This graph you're looking at came from the Harvard Business Review from a survey done in 2017 when the US economy particularly was operating at a really high level. 88% of companies surveyed said they were already going through a major disruption. And you know, there's different stages of it. This one comes from Accenture. And they looked at which industries were most susceptible to future disruption and which ones were going through the most disruption at the time they did this, which I believe was 2019. And if you don't see arts here, you don't see music here. So I'll leave it with you to see where you would be. You'd probably say in terms of current disruption, yes, we're at the top. Right now, that's true for a lot of industries. I see media and entertainment is there. I'm not sure it's exactly what you do. And then susceptibility to future disruption. Where would you put yourself? In the middle, further along the side? Oh, as I said, I'll leave it with you. But I would say all of these industries need to move further to the right because we are remaking and rethinking all of them. Now, why am I hopeful? Because I know that resilient organizations, and you can be one of them, do well even in recessions. This came from a study from McKinsey. They're a large consulting company. They looked at, I believe, 20,000 companies at the time of the last recession in the US, divided them into ones they called resilient and non-resilient based on a lot of criteria. And what they found is that compared to the non-resilient ones, the bottom lines, the resilient ones just did more. They looked at return to shareholders, and then they looked at the S&P 500 in the middle. And so the resilient ones, all those years, just did better than the average economy. Now, what made them resilient? I could talk about the technical things that they measured, but it basically is resilient companies just did more. They were more likely perhaps to cut expenses early on because they wanted to be able to deal with whatever came later. They also bought and acquired organizations. They just made different decisions and changed things up a lot. And ultimately, that put them in a better position. So the thing was sort of like they acted more. They invested in their client base, and this is not just from that study, but just in general, and I brought this up earlier. Resilient organizations tend to be the ones that say, these are our people, we're going to spend money on them, we are going to invest in them. They're innovative. And this graph might be from Apple, but there's a lot of innovative companies. During the last recession, Costco changed up their supply chains. During the last recession, Domino's, the pizza people, they actually changed their pizza recipe. And that's kind of crazy. You don't do that in the middle of recession, but they wanted to just stand out, and it actually worked. And I realized, again, you're not making pizza, but you're making something. And changing your offering may be the way to say, look, we're here. Netflix is a company that just showed up 2008, 2009, a whole new offering. And right time, perhaps. But the fact is that no matter how bad the economy looks overall, there is potential to grow. And I believe that this period, there is potential to grow. They give their workers body armor. Now, love this picture. This is from a production of Macbeth. This is Lady Macbeth's dress as designed by Terry Mugler, the French designer. I saw it in a museum exhibit in Montreal. The dress is actually made of leather. And it just made the point that she is strong and impenetrable, and you don't want to mess with her. And companies that are resilient tend to make their people feel like that you are protected, and we're giving you skills, and we're giving you body armor and the like. So if you look for ways to make your employees feel like that without dressing them up like that, that tends to work. A study of how this can work comes from the Vietnamese community in New Orleans. We had the Katrina hurricane in 2005, I believe, and it was devastating. A lot of people, most people, had to move out of town, and then they came back. And even when they came back, they had to rebuild, and a lot of them suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, mental issues, and somehow the Vietnamese community did better. So there's actual studies about this. What did they do? Well, when they were away, they communicated with each other. They had very good community involvement. The more affluent members of that community helped those who were less affluent. They shared information about business opportunities and just what was going on in New Orleans in general. They just had a really great network. They helped each other when they came back. They also had a great reputation. People saw them as hardworking, whether that's fair or not fair compared to other groups. But when they came back more seamlessly. And compared to either white Americans, African Americans, they had less post-traumatic stress. So I don't know, if you can be like that, if you can help each other and communicate, that has to be a good thing for this period we're going through. It's not about pushing through. Pushing through is kind of this American idea that we're going to slog through this and not think. This is much more nuanced. This is about thinking where we want to be, where you want to be, and getting to the end of it. You know, in sports, we sometimes talk about performance and recovery times. And it's not just about pushing through to the end. It's about kind of a long game and figuring out where you want to be and how you want to plan. It's about stopping and starting. It's about creating positive relationships. Another great story is the Ebola epidemic in Africa several years ago, at the worst part of it. It was very, very discouraging for people working there, the doctors managing it, because, you know, the staff they had was getting, in this one unit study, was getting obviously very discouraged and down, the amount of death they had to deal with. It's like, what are we doing? And somebody had the idea in this unit that when somebody walked out healthy, they should put their handprint on the wall. So whenever you walk past it, you could see the success, saying, we did that. We saved these people. It wasn't just about the death you saw today. And I think that is such an important concept for all of us as we go through this. Let's celebrate our success and let's show what we've done. Let's see it ourselves. Let's find a way to put the handprints out there, because the visual seeing it, or however you want to do it, matters a lot. And we have to remember what we're doing right, not just what we're losing. And finally, and this is important for you, resiliency means finding a sense of purpose. Also, from some of the studies on disease and dealing with disasters, the people who manage this know that a lot of people come in for the high. This is going to be a life experience. I'm going to be here and I'm going to, you know, have this great role in this. And a lot of people who come in with that don't stay. They get burned out. It's not as much fun as they thought it was going to be, and they do some time and they leave. The people who stay the longest, and you can spot them from the beginning apparently, are the ones who care about the project. And they're there for the sense of purpose. They know why they're there. It's to take care of these people and heal these people, and they can see the big picture. And that's what you have to find. It's what we have to find right now. What is the sense of purpose, and what are we doing, and why are we doing this? Because that's what keeps people fighting. You know, it's not just what's in front of us. Right now, I'm sure you have all kinds of stresses, financial stresses and human resource stresses, and I can't even imagine what else. And it's hard to focus on more than that. It's not even about, you know, what used to be the larger picture, putting on a production in a year or 2 years. It's about something more than that. It's about what you do and what you provide to Canada, which is huge in terms of providing music and in terms of providing an art form that's perhaps not always appreciated. And it doesn't have to be in exactly the form we've always seen it. It just has to be there longer. You have to find what you're really doing. And I understand it's difficult. And right now, with a pandemic and with thin margins and with governments that might be absent and with audiences that are dealing with a recession, it probably seems like it's impossible to get there, or at times maybe it does. And I can't think of better words to leave you with than the words of Nelson Mandela, who said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And I believe you will do it. I believe we will do it as a society, but I believe as a sector, you have so much to offer. You will definitely do it. So I am an optimist about this, and I can't wait to see where you are in this post-pandemic world that will come. Thank you so much. Catherine, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Linda, for sharing this high-speed tour of a lot of reading, a lot of experience, a lot of analysis, a lot of insight. We've had a number of fascinating things coming in through the chat box, and some are potential paradoxes in some of what you've offered to us, and some are just a wonderful opportunity for you to reflect yet more deeply on things that people are thinking about and working on right now. So things began to get very active in the chat box when you began to specifically talk about focusing on our base audience, focusing on our core of support, even in this post-pandemic world. And yet, so I'll give you one sort of observation and ask for some responses from you. And it's from Maria Hansen. Traditionally, orchestra audiences are of a higher age, and they're now at high risk. Assuming this audience will be even more hesitant to come back, is this not exactly the moment that we must engage younger audiences?
come back post-pandemic. I really hope that post-vaccine that everybody comes back. I agree there'll probably be some hesitancy because does this vaccine really work and is there still a risk? But I'm optimistic that that will happen. In the meantime, yes, there will be obviously staying away, which is why I say treat them as superstars, try and bring them in virtually, try and keep them engaged. You know, there was a hotel I stayed in Chicago last year. They just sent me an email saying, do you want to buy a bond in the future? When you come back, it'll be worth twice as much. If you give us $100 more now, we'll give you $200 worth in the future. In terms of engaging the other audiences, I just don't want to see you throwing good money after bad. I'm just so concerned about middle income, younger Canadian households. I feel like you might go after them right now and you may not get what you put into them. I'm not saying don't go after them over the longer term. I'm just saying now when you're trying to stop the bleeding and try to get yourself into a viable place and where you do have demographics that are going to probably be supportive of you, more older households, be really, really careful about where you put your efforts.
Great. Now, another interesting challenge, and that is from Helen Graham, who says, age is only one slice of the demographic. What about cultural origin mix, particularly given decreasing education in schools about classical and orchestral music? Any sort of thoughts on, were you able to go any deeper into the demographic profiles?
I was so disappointed, Catherine, at the numbers. I spent a lot of time asking for good data from Statistics Canada and as well from the US data sources. I was disappointed what they collect and what was available. Where I did find it interesting was where I saw the huge efforts being made to try and engage kids who are not at school right now. And I'd like to think that they will get excited about what could be offered and that you can find a way to reach them even more, and that they will be part of this or asked to be part of this as they come out of it longer. But you know, you can tell me if that's optimistic or not. I'd like to think that this is going to work and this pandemic will be the amazing opportunity to engage them.
Well, one interesting piece of data collection that we did here at Orchestras Canada in the last 18 months or so was actually working with smaller budget orchestras in Ontario, where we had the opportunity to do the Environics scan of their ticket buyers, just to see if we could come up with an overall idea. And one of the things that we were quite cheered to learn was the number of orchestras in very culturally diverse areas who were in fact quite successful at attracting an audience that looked like their communities. So it's being done, it can be done, and it's really exciting to see what it is that people are doing. Okay, we've got another fabulous one here from Bradley Powell, who says, how do we reconcile who we want to become, so that overall question around mission? Our business model was too fragile way before the pandemic, and we need to focus on only core audiences for the next little while. You sort of see where we're being asked to reinvent and focus on core, and the business model wasn't working. Any sort of reflections on that really interesting overlap of perspectives?
It's unfortunate, right? It's unfortunate we're looking at a recession at the same time that we're dealing with health issues. They should be at least done separately, but we're not getting the choice here. You know, the core thing I didn't say to say don't go after the others, and I hope it's not taken that way. It's just being very brutally honest with you, that at least I see there's money and stability there, and don't lose them. Like, the most important thing I would say is don't lose them because they can't come into the venues. Please keep them engaged until they can and have them support you until they can. The reinventing, I assume you wanted to do anyway. Now you're just forced to do it, just like so many companies. Companies who have always said to people in all industries, no, we can't have you working at home. It's impossible. And now all of a sudden they have to deal with that. And it's a bit like this, that you had this fragile business model and you were told, no, you should do something about it. And you said, it's impossible. We can't do that. And now maybe you can make it possible. So I'm not suggesting it's easy. I'm just saying, as somebody looking at this, I don't see that there's a choice. That when I say reinvent, there's reinvent short term and there's reinvent longer term. Reinvent short term to get through this and see what works. Reinvent longer term to say, in 5 years, where do we want to be? And is there something we can do now to get ourselves ready for that?
I'm going to put together a couple of questions that have come in and say that the sort of move to digital forms of connection has been a necessity for many orchestras through this period of time, and I think we've all been blown away by what we've seen. And we've also seen that it's been very challenging to directly monetize because there is an expectation of so much free content. The idea is it's out there, it's free, and at a certain point, however, we're going to be asking people to come back in to the hall and pay for the experience. What are some options in terms of putting a value on that experience? What are the options around monetizing online content? What have you seen in other industries around monetization of digital content, and how do we carry that through to a willingness to invest in the live experience? I was trying to put together, I think, 3 or 4 different questions, so my apologies for the length of that one.
It's difficult. I wrote for the Globe and Mail, and I don't think it's a secret that they have tons of people who are online, and yet they've had a very difficult time monetizing that people expect to get it free if there's an article. And even the pandemic covers right now, a lot of newspapers made it free. Some are kind of saying, look, we're not charities. We can't give you all of this free coverage. What are you guys giving us for free? And it's a bit like that everybody wants what you have. They don't want to pay for it, and we've got this expectation. Now, the example that it is perhaps encouraging to you is the Atlantic magazine. They do great coverage on the pandemic and other things, and they said, no, we're not giving it away for free. You guys can subscribe. This is the time. And they've actually done really well on that. You may have heard they did layoffs last week. That's because they have a live events business, and they had to let people go there. But they actually saw subscriptions go up in the middle of this. I don't know if you can. I don't know when the right moment is. It's going to be different for every organization. But I think in general, all of these people giving things away are going to have to pull back on it. It's not sustainable. As well, if it's in any way possible to give people something, I said the bottle of champagne to celebrate that they're buying some kind of ticket or some kind of acknowledgement, oftentimes that is disproportionately viewed as something that you didn't get nothing for what you gave, for what you paid. And if there's a way to celebrate people that way, by a card signed by a performer, or by a Zoom call with somebody in the orchestra to say thank you, or with a private concert that's only offered to subscribers, that could be worth something too. But again, it's not easy. Like I said, we've created this expectation where if it's online, you shouldn't have to pay for it. And I think it's going to be an unrolling that happens over a period of time.
Well, as someone who gives The Guardian $5 a month, it was in response to a very thoughtful note at the bottom of every free Guardian article that I looked at that said, look, quality coverage has a price. Please help us. And in fact, it was a call to my communitarian instincts, I think, to be able to, invest in something that actually meant something to me as well. So I'm just going to scroll down here and note that you've received a few amens for personalized stewardship during this period of time. And just to say that those relationships that we put so much energy into nurturing pre-pandemic are really important ones to look at. So I've got another question from Bradley. Last week, Abacus Data noted that some audiences in Canada, and he thought it might have been up to 26%, have noted that they might not ever come back to concerts. So thinking that we're in this fourth industrial revolution, are there other ways that we can look at using digital to personalize those communications?
Yeah, and I think we're kind of figuring this out because, this has been nice that you've had this many people who are able to listen to this conference who can't always get to wherever it is physically. And after this, maybe we'll see much more of this, more people online. It's not perfect. I'd rather be in the room with you and feel the energy, but there's advantages to doing it this way as well. In terms of what people say now, though, in terms of what they will never do, will they never come back because, they're afraid of the germs? We said a lot of things as a society post 9/11. It was supposed to be, there was not going to be that much flying, or even after the attacks in Paris a few years ago, people said, well, maybe you'll never have people coming back to a soccer stadium that way. Memories are short. So I would be a little skeptical of what people say at the height of this and what actually happens.
Well, I'm remembering that irony was supposed to die. if I'm recalling correctly, after 9/11. And now that I'm seeing that it's irony isn't dead, as far as I've been able to figure out, it may have taken a slight nap. I also notice we've had a suggestion from a couple of folks that there are things like tip jars available. People are able to make a contribution. And certainly I'm thinking about the Vancouver Symphony's performance, full stage, empty Orpheum Theatre on the 15th of March, where in fact they brought in a host of new donors who experienced the Vancouver Symphony's live stream and were so excited by what they heard and so wanted to salute the courage and the energy of the organization that they made their first gifts. So, I think there'll be some really isn't this interesting? We have an update from the Vancouver Symphony. We're now getting regular small donations with each VSO at home performance that they're putting on. So it does sound as though there are opportunities for people to express their support. And clearly there's opportunities to make it as easy as possible for them to do so, to invest in the kind of content that they're looking for. So we can look to that and try to model it across the economy. Okay, one last question, Linda, if you will. In the economic model that you're talking about, are musicians a commodity that we arts organizations must figure out how to use in order to satisfy the audience? And if we choose an audience who believes in what we do, is it a wiser use of limited resources?
I don't think I understood the end of that question. Are they a commodity? And as an organization?
It's deployment of resources. And if we think of the musicians as resources to the organization, is that in effect good management, is using the resources of the organization to the maximum impact?
Yeah, I hate the word commodity for human beings, and we hear it in a lot of organizations. I like human resources better. I guess the question is the right thing for the organization to have people on as part of the team long term, or does it make more sense that they're sort of temporary team members and they're finding other things to do in other ways, which is something musicians have always done, right? They've taught and they've worked different places. I think it's the rest of the economy that's not used to this model. And that's something you have to answer. Is it better for you to use them and have them used in a larger group and in a permanent way, or is it better to rethink that model? And I would urge you, though, that if you're going to change things up, I think as a group and as an industry, totally need to support each other and totally need to think about collective resources and collective training and, being something like the Vietnamese community in Katrina, thinking we're part of a whole and can we help each other?
I think that these are really provocative questions that you're posing, and unfortunately we don't have time to resolve all of them. So I think what I'll do at this point, Linda, is thank you most heartily for your presentation today. I think you've set a new high standard for our online series. And I'll invite people, if you're interested in reading more of Linda's work and staying in touch with her wonderful brain, she has very kindly offered us a number of free e-copies of her new book, Work is Not a Place, Our Lives and Our Organizations in the Post-Jobs Economy. And if you're interested, please get in touch with Nick Walsh, that's Nick at oc.ca, and he can hit you up with the download code for the book. Once again, Linda, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Thanks to the Canada Council for the Arts for permitting us to redirect the travel bursaries that we're no longer in a position to award to folks to help support this series. And thanks to all of you for taking part in today's call.